You'd be surprised at how inaccurate the world map most of us grew up with actually is. The traditional map, found on globes, in classrooms, and in many offices worldwide, may appear familiar, but it's actually misleading in many ways. Although the Mercator projection, the most common world map, has been a staple for centuries, it distorts the true size and shape of Earth's landmasses, often leading to misconceptions about the world's geography. First, let's start with the basics. Earth is a sphere, and trying to represent its three-dimensional surface on a two-dimensional map inevitably causes distortions. The Mercator projection, created by Gerardus Mercator in 1569, became the go-to map for navigation because it preserves accurate angles, making it easier for sailors to chart a straight course across the seas. However, this method of mapping comes with a significant drawback. The farther you move from the equator, the more distorted the sizes of countries and continents become. To understand how this distortion works, let's take the U.S. state of Wyoming as an example. Wyoming is almost perfectly square, making it a great subject for this exercise. If you stack a series of Wyomings on top of one another and move them northward on the Mercator map, you'll notice that each successive Wyoming seems to stretch and expand as you get closer to the North Pole. The state's familiar shape becomes increasingly distorted until it's almost unrecognizable. On the flip side, if you move those stacked Wyomings closer to the equator, they start to compress together. This same phenomenon affects every landmass on the planet, with distortion becoming more pronounced the further you move from the equator. Let's turn to Texas, a state famous for its size. The phrase, "everything's bigger in Texas," might be true in some contexts, but how does Texas really compare on a global scale? On the Mercator map, Texas looks large, but when you compare it to countries in Europe, the true scale of Texas becomes clearer. Surprisingly, Texas is larger than France, Portugal, and Spain combined. However, it's important to note that Texas isn't even the largest state in the U.S. That title belongs to Alaska. Alaska is often depicted as an enormous landmass sprawling across the top of North America on the Mercator map. At first glance, it seems like Alaska is a giant state, much larger than anything else in the United States. But when you take a closer look, Alaska's true size isn't as overwhelming as it appears. When placed over the contiguous United States, Alaska is indeed large, but not the gargantuan expanse it seems to be. Similarly, when you move Alaska over to Europe, it's sizable, but doesn't overshadow the entire continent as the Mercator map might suggest. Now let's shift our focus to Europe. On the Mercator map, European countries like France, the United Kingdom, and Germany appear large and significant. But when you compare them to African countries, the distortion becomes evident. For instance, if you move France to Africa, you'll see that it fits comfortably within the continent, but it's dwarfed by the vastness of Africa. The Sahara Desert alone is almost large enough to fit the entire contiguous United States, showing just how massive Africa really is, a fact often overlooked due to the Mercator projection. The United Kingdom, another country that seems quite large on the map, is also affected by distortion. When you compare the UK to countries in Asia like Japan or the Philippines, or even to islands like Madagascar, it becomes clear that the UK is relatively small. For example, Japan, an archipelago often seen as small on the map, is actually larger than the UK. Similarly, Madagascar is much bigger than the UK, despite what the map might suggest. Let's move south to Australia. Many people underestimate the size of Australia, but when you compare it to other countries, its true scale becomes apparent. If you superimpose Australia onto the continental United States, you'll see that it covers almost the entire country. In fact, if you were to combine the land areas of Portugal, Estonia, Albania, Hungary, Belgium, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Austria, Croatia, Latvia, the Czech Republic, Serbia, Switzerland, Slovakia, Lithuania, Denmark, Ireland, Greece, Bulgaria, Romania, Italy, Germany, France, Spain, and Norway, all together, they would fit into Australia's land area with room to spare. Heading back north, let's talk about Canada. Canada is one of the world's largest countries, and on the Mercator map, it looks absolutely massive, stretching across much of the northern hemisphere. However, when you compare Canada to other large countries like China, you'll find that they are roughly the same size. Yet, when you place Canada over Europe, it seems to stretch from the Atlantic to the Arctic, giving the illusion that it's much larger than it actually is. If we stay in the east, Japan is another country that surprises many people when its true size is revealed. On the Mercator map, Japan might look like a small string of islands off the coast of Asia, but in reality, it's much larger than most people think. If you were to position Japan off the coast of the United States, it would stretch nearly the entire length of the eastern seaboard. Japan's size is significant, and when compared to countries like the United Kingdom, it's easy to see how the map can mislead us about the true scale of different places. Now let's head to South America and talk about Brazil. Brazil is the largest country in South America, but the Mercator map often makes it seem smaller than it actually is. When you compare Brazil to Australia, you'll see that Brazil is actually larger. In fact, Brazil is almost as large as the entire continental United States. When placed over Africa, Brazil takes up a significant portion of the continent, further emphasizing its massive size. Speaking of Africa, let's take a closer look at just how big this continent really is. The Mercator map drastically underrepresents the size of Africa, making it appear smaller than it actually is. However, when you start comparing Africa to other parts of the world, its true scale becomes clear. The entire contiguous United States could fit into just the Sahara Desert. Moreover, Africa can comfortably accommodate China, Western Europe, India, Argentina, Scandinavia, and the United Kingdom all at the same time, with room to spare. This realization challenges the way we think about global geography and the true size of the world's continents. Russia is another country that appears enormous on the Mercator map, stretching across the entire northern part of Eurasia. But when you compare Russia to Africa, it suddenly seems much smaller. Russia, while large, doesn't dominate the globe in the way the Mercator map suggests. Africa dwarfs Russia, once again highlighting the inaccuracies of the Mercator projection. Let's also consider some smaller yet equally surprising comparisons. Sweden, for instance, seems like a large country on the map, but when placed next to Madagascar, it's actually smaller. Iceland, often thought of as a large island, is roughly the same size as Tasmania, the small island off the southern coast of Australia. These comparisons further illustrate how the Mercator projection distorts our perception of the world's geography. One of the most misleading features of the Mercator map is Greenland. Greenland appears as a massive landmass, almost the size of Africa, and larger than many continents, including South America and Australia. But when you look at a globe or use a different projection, Greenland's true size becomes apparent. Greenland is much smaller than the Mercator map suggests, illustrating the extreme distortion at the poles. Finally, let's talk about Antarctica, the often overlooked continent at the bottom of the map. Because it's so far removed from the equator, the true size of Antarctica is difficult to grasp. However, Antarctica is a massive continent, much larger than Australia. If you stretch Antarctica from Kiev in Ukraine to Kampala in Uganda, it would cover that entire distance. If placed between the southern tip of Texas and the northernmost islands of Canada, Antarctica would span the entire distance, showing just how enormous this icy continent really is. The Mercator projection has been a valuable tool for navigation, but it has also distorted our understanding of global geography. From Greenland's exaggerated size to Africa's underrepresentation, this map has influenced how we perceive the world's continents and countries. By exploring these comparisons, we can gain a clearer, more accurate picture of the world we live in. Next time you look at a world map, remember that appearances can be deceiving. The true sizes of countries and continents might surprise you, revealing a world that is much more complex and interconnected than a flat map can convey. If you enjoyed this exploration of global geography, please leave a comment below sharing what surprised you the most, or tell us about another geographical oddity you've encountered. And don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more insightful content like this.